Okay, so welcome again, everyone. I am going to talk to you about the four pillars today. So we did our warm-up question. I got to know all of you a lot better, as always. And then we'll take a break after my lecture, and then we'll go into small groups to talk about the culture change. So I don't know if all of you or some of you have heard of four frame model. Those of you who have MBAs or have some organization leadership or experience in business or economics, for instance, there's a four frame model that has been developed by Bolman and Deal. There's more models out there. You're going to notice as doctoral students that there's going to be lots of theories, theoretical concepts, conceptual framework that you're going to be dealing with. And one of the things that you have to decipher is figuring out, especially which concentration that you're in. You will need to be well versed in your concentrations to ensure that you're picking up the right theory and the right model, and you could do a combination. So this is a four frame model. I'm not going into too much of it in depth just because there's a whole course on organization culture and change and theory in our department. So it hasn't been offered yet, but it is a precursor to survey of leadership. And then once you take that, you can take the organization culture and change and theories. So I want to go into the four frame model because this is going to speak to the next worksheet that you're going to work on. How do you create that roadmap for the organization to make sure that they are able to change and be willing to adapt the learning technology or the technology that you are introducing to the organization? Like I said, if you are the top dog or in the C-suite where you make the ultimate decision, for instance, it's going to be easier for you to think about and also talk about and also adapt the new learning technology. So what Bolman and Lee, what they talk about is the first frame is structural framework. So what is a structural frame? So there's three concepts that are in there. So a lot of times when you're learning about different theories and models, the researchers are going to give you information about how they came about. So the structural frame is what you're used to over the years. What is the organization structure? So it's usually rooted in sociology, management science. So a lot of times the key concepts are goals, roles and divisions of labor, meaning, remember, is it hierarchical? Is it lateral? There's different types of structures that exist in organization, formal relationship, informal relationships. And you also talk about the central focus, which is the alignment of structure with goals and environment. So if we talk about the military, it's definitely hierarchical, right? You have the general, the colonel, lieutenant colonel, it goes on in terms of course, depending on the branches. So Army and Air Force, I have to think about the Space Force, but I know they're called Guardians. But for the Navy, they have the rank structure is similar, but it's a different name. So anyway, so that kind of structural framework gives you an idea of who makes the ultimate decision, right, at the top, and then it trickles down. If you look at the structure of Google or Apple, for instance, they have more of a flat structure, meaning that a lot of times they have these 3-hour meetings on a weekly basis where all the folks are meeting and all the departments are actually reporting on what they're working on. So it's more like a small startup in each of the portions of the organization. So I know one of your colleagues asked, like, what is considered an organization? That's a great question, because in Google or Apple, for instance, each of the department is actually recognized as a startup. So when we were stationed at Traverse Air Force Base, it's in Northern California, very close to Silicon Valley. So I had the pleasure of meeting a lot of folks who are working in Facebook, or Meta, and different organizations, Google, and you name it, all the Silicon Valley stuff with technology. And it was very interesting to hear about what they do in meetings and how they make the decisions. So depending on what the structural frame is, when you think about all the worksheet that you worked on, I know all of you did a beautiful job on pinpointing what's there, what's not there, what you need, etc. Think about, so 4 areas that you're thinking about is structure is very important to think about, and also easiest to find, just because if your company is publicly traded company, they have to disclose how the organization and decision-making process happens for your stakeholders. The next one that a lot of people, exception of a couple of you who work in human resources, don't really think about. So for instance, what is human resources? In other words, it's called human capital. So what does human capital mean? We want to find out who is in your organization. So if you're looking at the roots, so academically, what are we thinking about? So we're talking about personality, social psychology. So what discipline we're looking at when we talk about human resources. We want to know the dynamics between the people, and also within the people and outside of the organization. Are they hiring a lot of introverts? There's a selection bias of people who are joining the military, joining the Silicon Valley, joining the academia, for instance, higher education, also primary and secondary, and also in healthcare. There are different types of people who are going into these professions. So one of the key concepts, or many of the concepts that you have to look at, is when we talk about social psychology or psychology in general, is the needs. So there's an internal need and also external need. It's like SWOT analysis, but we're looking at individuals at this point. Capacity, skills. So a lot of you are mentioning about the fact that, yes, we have great people, but they're lacking in skill sets. And also feelings. There are people with thick skins versus people who have really thin skins, very sensitive, and also people who have hard thick skins, where they're able to kind of separate, work happenings and also, personal things. I'm somewhere in the middle. I am very sensitive, but it's, you learn those skills as you go, right? Depending on what kind of leadership that you are in. And then the central focus is the fit between the individual and organization. So it's easy to talk about our university, because one of the things that our university focuses on is social justice and also being good for the rest of the community. The reason why all of you are in the doctoral program is not only are you trying to fulfill your personal fulfillment, but also making a change in the world, right? In the community that you live in. So what is the fit between individuals and organization? So sometimes it's a bad fit where individuals, especially if it's a social culture, the water cooler talks and, a lot of socialization, if it's part of unwritten culture, but the person is an introvert and they don't enjoy those things, what's going to happen is it's going to be a bad fit. And so human resources frame is going to be very important. Like I said, this is usually not thought about very deeply, just because personnel changes. However, if you know for a fact that if there's a high turnover, those of you who are in HR, those of you who have been in a lot of different organizations, except of course for the military, where you have to PCS or move to different locations depending on the mission. But regardless, if there's a high turnover of people leaving the organization, there's something is not right or something is going on. Another thing, this year is the election year. No one really wants to talk about politics. However, politics do exist in organization, and not understanding and acknowledging the politics is going to be an issue. So politics. So those of you who have poli-science background in your bachelor's or in your master's, very good. But what's going to happen here is that you have to understand the interests, conflict, power, and the whole scarcity mindset in terms of resources, because especially in America, we are in a more of a competitive society compared to, let's say, in Asia. When we were stationed in Korea, for instance, it's more of a community where competition and conflict is frowned upon. You want to not stand out. You want to be, working well together. However, in America, for instance, or US, being different and standing out is well rewarded. Meaning, so there's different types of political framework and culture that you have to think about, which all of you alluded to and also stated in your assignments so far. So you have to understand the interest of the individual and also the organization, as well as the conflict. Some people actually thrive in conflict situations, and sometimes the conflicts can lead to good ideas, etc. However, like I said, one of your classmates mentioned communication. As long as there's communication, you're able to hopefully be able to resolve conflicts, but that's not always the case, as all of us know what's going on in the world. So political framework, the central focus is getting and using power. So there's a lot of complex layers. So the longer that you're in the organization, that unwritten rule of, okay, if you're in this organization, so for example, the token or the currency of moving ahead in an organization is information. If that is the case, what do you think will happen? People are not going to share information. People with the most information is equated to power. Therefore, there's not going to be a lot of communication. Only need to know basis. However, sometimes people have to know more. So the central focus here is trying to manage conflict to get things done, meaning it's going to be very important to understand the political structure, but also the human nature aspect of it. Therefore, it gets really, really complicated. The one that is very interesting that I know most of my students tell me that they never thought of this before is symbolics. So I know it sounds a little non-academic, but symbolic framework. So those of you who went to undergrad or high school or even the master's program, if there's a strong connection and a big pride about the university or organization, they're going to stick together. So one of the roots or disciplines that you're looking at is sociology and also cultural anthropology. So those are the two disciplines that you're thinking about when you're talking about symbolic frame. So for example, different gangs have different signs, right? And on the other hand, different companies with logo. Nike, right, has that swoosh, right? Apple has that Apple logo. Google has their thing, Facebook, etc. So symbolic frame is going to be very, very useful and also important. So that's also going to convey culture, also myth, meaning there's a lot of when you talk to people, when I get off the airplane, I'm in an Uber, and when I tell them that I work for UIW, people always talk about, oh, wow, it's a faith-based university, very good reputation, the whole Catholic nun, discovering. So it has a pretty good reputation, right? The myth, the ritual, and the story. So the story, of course, for me, that moved me for UIW as an epidemiologist is having those three young nuns coming from France, right? Lyon, France, coming to Texas to take care of kids who were afflicted with cholera outbreak, right, in the 1881. So there's a story, there's ritual, so tailgating, homecoming, etc. So these are key concepts. The more you have the culture, ritual, and story. So, for example, in the Air Force, I'm not quite sure if it's in the Army or Navy or Space Force, but the whole coin thing, right? There's rituals for promotion, rituals for going away, taking a command. I mean, I know it's really tiresome. However, you realize there's a lot of symbolic thing that bring people together. So when you look at the organization, you have to kind of see, okay, what are the things that people do? Are they wearing the organization colors? Do they participate? What do they identify with, etc.? So the central focus is creating meaning. So a lot of times people quit because they feel like they're overlooked. Their managers are not, are either micromanaging or not giving directions, etc. So people talk about how they don't care about, I mean, yes, they do care about salary, but at the end of the day, they want to know the meaning, what kind of impact that they're making at their job, right? And building the culture. So, what part of the organization are you at? So are all the people in the organization recognized or not recognized? So you have to kind of look at it from external, internally, especially if you've been with the organization for a long time. For me, because I'm active duty military spouse and I get to switch jobs every couple of years, that I am able to be an outsider in organizations where there's a lot of employees that have been in the organization for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. So you're coming in and observing different kinds of rituals, stories, culture, etc. So you want to see the staging of organizational drama, meaning, yeah, it's like a soap opera sometimes. There are different characters, and I think if you go to self-help books and also in the business section, there's going to be different types of people that you meet in an organization, and you'll notice that different people fit into different types at every single organization. So you have to kind of see where people fit into the organization. And these 4 areas are going to be very, very important. The ones that are not going to be written is the political, the human resources, and the symbolic. So when you're thinking about changing the organization culture, this is where you come in as a subject matter expert, as well as someone who knows the organization, who can convince and also alleviate some of the fears and anxiety that people might feel about the change that is going to come. So I'm going to stop here and stop the recording.